Welcome back to the deep dive. For tonight's episode, we are heading over to Occult Archives.
Okay.
Where we like to take a look at some of history's most talked about and maybe even feared books. And
yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, we thought this would be a good one. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in this one.
Yeah.
So this is episode 247.
Okay.
And we're calling this one In the Outer Court, Hidden Pathways to Initiation, Esoteric Discipline, and the Forbidden Gateway to the Temple of Occult Light.
Oh, wow.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's quite a title.
It is quite a title.
Definitely piques the curiosity.
Yeah, and
what is all this about?
Exactly.
What are we going to be looking at?
Yeah, so I know the title makes it sound like we're about to reveal some lost ancient text.
Right.
But really, we're looking at something that's very well known.
It is.
We are going to be looking at the Prophecies of Nostradamus. But specifically, we're going to be looking at the preface to Caesar Nostradamus.
Right.
Which is included in the collection of his prophecies.
Exactly.
So I think
it's a good place to start, I think.
It's a really good place to start because even though this is a really well-known work, I don't think that a lot of people have actually sat down and read through it and really thought about what he's actually saying.
Yeah.
So
especially the preface. I think a lot of people kind of skip over that and go right to
the good stuff.
The juicy prophecies.
Yeah, the prophecies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
so we're going to lay the groundwork.
Yeah, think of it as,
get a foundation here.
We're in the outer court. We're going to get our bearings before we even think about venturing into the temple.
Exactly.
And, I think for you, the listener, this is going to be a good chance to go beyond all of the common interpretations of his work that are out there.
Right.
A lot of people have come along since then and sort of put their own spin on it. And so we're kind of going right to the source material.
Yeah, let's hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Yeah.
What did he think he was doing?
Exactly.
Why did he write this?
Yeah. And what does that tell us about prophecy itself?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think a good place to start would be, it kicks off with a very personal note. This preface he's writing to his son Caesar.
Yeah, it's a letter, essentially, to his son Caesar. And he mentions that Caesar arrived late in his life. Kind of a later in life child.
Interesting.
And he really wants to leave him something, he wants to leave behind some kind of, wisdom. Legacy. Something that'll benefit him, but not only him, but, benefit all men.
Right.
So he's got kind of a
bigger purpose in mind.
Yeah, a bigger purpose.
Yeah.
Than just, father to son advice. He wants this to be something that everybody can take something from.
It's interesting, too, that, he links, this ability to see things to come,
right,
to divine spirit and astronomy.
Yes, that's a very interesting combination.
Like he's laying out his credentials right from the start.
Yeah. What qualifies him to do this?
Right.
And yeah, he's definitely saying, look, I've got this divine, inspiration.
Right.
But I'm also backing that up.
Grounding it in something.
Yeah, grounding it in something that at the time was considered, a very legitimate science.
Right.
Astronomy and astrology kind of went hand in hand back then.
Right.
And, that was really how people understood the world. They looked to the stars and the movements of the stars and the planets to make sense of things.
Yeah, they believed that those movements actually had a direct impact on
people's lives.
Yeah.
On world events.
Yeah. And I mean, even today, we know that like the tides are influenced by the moon.
Absolutely.
I mean, so there's
a connection.
There is that connection. And I think that's a good point to bring up, too, for you, the listener, is that,
right,
he didn't see himself as just a mystic or just a scientist.
Right.
He was someone who occupied both of those worlds.
Yeah.
And I think he felt that that was what gave him this unique ability to see things.
A unique perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's this sense of urgency.
Yes.
Like he's worried about his writings being destroyed. He talks about the injustice of the age. And
right.
He even says that the key to the hidden prediction will be locked in his heart.
It sounds very dramatic.
Yeah, it's very dramatic. And you can almost feel that fear.
Yeah, you can sense
that he has, that, he's writing these things down.
Right.
That he thinks are really important.
He thinks are important messages.
Yeah, but he's worried about them being suppressed or him being persecuted for it.
Well, and think about the time that he's living in.
Right.
I mean, this is, the 16th century. This is a time of huge upheaval.
Yeah.
Religious upheaval. political upheaval.
Yeah.
This is the Reformation. This is, countries are breaking apart from the Catholic Church and forming their own, Protestant churches. And so to be expressing any kind of, alternative view or challenging the status quo could be really dangerous.
Yeah, you could get burned at the stake.
Literally.
Yeah. So it's no wonder that he's
a little paranoid, about the reception of this work.
Right.
And, maybe this is why he encoded it in this, obscure and difficult to decipher way.
Yeah.
It wasn't just to be mysterious. It was really a matter of survival.
Yeah. So, for you, the listener, you really have to think about that. Like the fact that it's so hard to understand might not be accidental. Right. It might actually be a deliberate choice.
A strategy.
Yeah, that he made because of the times that he was living in.
Absolutely.
He also points out that these things that he's describing haven't happened yet.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
He's writing this in March 14, 1557.
Yeah.
And he's very clear that this is about the future.
Right.
These events are yet to come.
And that really reinforces the idea that, he really was trying to predict future events.
Yeah. He's not just commenting on current affairs.
Right.
He's claiming to see ahead.
Right.
And to know what's coming.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, the whole question of how did he view prophecy?
Right.
Like, what was it?
What fueled it?
What was the source of this knowledge?
Yeah. Yeah, because he goes on to say
he does
that his inspiration isn't, some kind of Bacchic frenzy or enchantments.
Yeah, not magic, not just making this up, not some kind of, trance state.
Yeah.
He's saying this comes from astronomical assurances.
Right.
And inspiration from divine will and the spirit of prophecy in particular.
Yeah, so he's trying to really set himself apart from
the more superstitious
ideas about prophecy.
Yeah, like he doesn't want to be seen as just a fortune teller.
Exactly. He wants to be seen as someone who is, grounded in reason and knowledge and divine inspiration.
And it's interesting because he does claim to have predicted specific events far in advance that had already happened by the time he wrote this. But
he doesn't give any examples.
He doesn't give us any examples.
No.
So you kind of have to take his word for it.
You do.
It's kind of like, somebody saying, trust me, I've been right before.
Right. But
not really showing you their work.
Exactly. It makes you wonder.
It does make you wonder, yeah.
Yeah.
He also talks about how he initially didn't even want to publish these prophecies.
Yeah, he was hesitant.
Yeah, he was afraid of the injustice, not only of the present time, but also of most of the future.
Right.
And that's an interesting phrase.
It is.
Most of the future. Yeah, like he's really thinking long term.
Yeah.
He's thinking centuries ahead. And he's worried about how these prophecies will be received, not just now, but, hundreds of years from now.
Right.
He's worried about being misunderstood, about people taking his words out of context.
Yeah, and that really speaks to his awareness of how potentially controversial these predictions might be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're predicting things that go against what everybody believes.
Or what the people in power believe.
Right.
That can be very dangerous.
Yeah, so that's why he...
And that leads into this whole idea of, ambiguous and enigmatic comments about future causes to avoid unduly scandalizing delicate sensibilities.
Yeah, that's quite a phrase.
Yeah. He's deliberately making it hard to understand what he's saying.
Yes.
And he even quotes the Bible.
He does.
About not giving holy things to dogs.
Right. Or casting pearls before swine.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's saying, these are profound truths, but they're not for everybody.
Right.
You have to be ready to receive them.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared.
So again, for you, the listener, the fact that it's so hard to understand is intentional.
Yeah.
He did that on purpose.
It was a choice, not an accident or a lack of skill.
And then he goes on to talk about who these hidden things are revealed to.
Right.
And he says, it's not the wise and the circumspect.
Not the powerful.
Yeah, not the powerful.
Well, the elite.
Yeah, but it's purified for the small and the poor.
Interesting.
Those with the power to perceive what is distant.
Yeah, what's far off.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because it kind of suggests that that you need a certain type of humility to understand these prophecies.
Yeah.
A receptiveness that you might not find among the elite who are really invested in.
And keeping things the way they are.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe he felt that those who were less entrenched in the present
right.
could see the future more clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, he also gets into this whole idea of
He does.
the limitations of human knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that, we human beings cannot, through our natural consciousness and intelligence, know anything of God, the Creator's hidden secrets.
Right.
And that it is not for us to know the times or the instants.
And that sounds almost contradictory to the whole idea of prophecy, of predicting the future.
Yeah, he's claiming to know the future, but then he's saying...
Right, but he's also saying there are limits to human understanding, and that ultimately God's will is unknowable to us.
Through our own...
intellect and perception.
Yeah.
But then he introduces this idea that God can choose to reveal certain things about the future.
Yeah.
And he does this through images and through what he calls orthodox astrology.
So it's not just, human intellect alone.
Right.
It's a divinely assisted understanding that's facilitated by astrological knowledge.
And that's interesting because I think nowadays we think of astrology as kind of like a parlor game.
Right.
But back then it was a serious...
It was a science.
There's a science.
Yeah.
And it was something that people... really used to understand.
To understand the world.
The world around them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like he's saying, astrology is kind of like this lens that God has provided.
To see things.
To see things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like you need a special instrument to perceive certain things.
Yeah.
Like a microscope or a telescope.
Right.
You need something to enhance your perception.
Yeah. So in a way, he's kind of positioning himself
as this, divinely appointed observer and interpreter.
Yeah. And he goes on to talk about these occult prophecies.
Yeah, he does.
And he mentions the subtle spirit of fire and the contemplation of the distant stars.
Yeah, it's getting pretty mystical here.
Yeah, it does. And it's interesting because he doesn't like to call himself a prophet.
Right.
He prefers seer.
Seer, yeah.
As someone who sees distant things through natural knowledge of all creatures.
Right.
And that's a subtle distinction.
It is a subtle distinction.
But it's an important one.
Why do you think he shies away from the term prophet?
Well, I think, prophet has very strong religious connotations.
Right.
We think of prophets as people who speak directly
for God.
For God. Yeah. And I think he saw himself more as someone who was observing and interpreting signs.
Yeah. Right. Like a translator almost.
Yeah. With divine assistance.
Yeah.
But not necessarily like,
the mouthpiece of God.
The mouthpiece of God, right.
Yeah. So he's interpreting this divine language that's written in the stars. And in the natural world...
Yeah, it's like God's putting on a show.
And he's got front row seats.
Yeah, and he's interpreting it for us.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because he does say...
He does.
...that a prophet bringing the perfect light of prophecy may make manifest things, both human and divine.
So he acknowledges that there is a higher level of prophetic ability, maybe, than what he's claiming.
Right. Yeah. So it's like he's not saying that he's the be-all, end-all of prophets.
He's not the ultimate prophet.
He's just he's got his understanding.
Yeah, he's got his insights.
Yeah.
And he's sharing them.
But he acknowledges that there may be others who are, even closer to that divine source.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So then he talks about the source of this prophetic knowledge. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
He says that God's mysteries are incomprehensible.
Right.
That we can't fully understand them. But he also says that the power to influence events is linked to natural knowledge, to free will, and to planetary movements.
Yeah.
So it's not just God dictating everything.
Right.
It's this complex interplay of divine will, natural forces, and human choices.
And I think that's a really important point for people to understand.
It is.
Because, a lot of times people think that if you're talking about prophecy, then everything is predetermined.
Right. It's all fated.
But he's saying, no, it's not like that.
It's not that simple.
Yeah, there's
free will involved.
Yeah.
There's, choice involved.
Yeah. And so his prophecies aren't necessarily guarantees of what's going to happen.
Right.
But they're more like interpretations.
Possibilities.
Yeah. Of these forces interacting with each other.
It's like a weather forecast.
Right.
You can look at the patterns and make predictions, but there's always a chance that something unexpected could happen.
Yeah. And then he really comes out strongly against execrable magic.
Yes.
Reproved by the Holy Scriptures.
Yeah.
But he makes an exception.
But he makes an exception.
For the use of official astrology.
Official astrology, yes.
And I think that's a really important distinction.
It is.
Because he's trying to distance himself
from
practices that the church considered heretical.
Right.
Or superstitious.
Like black magic, necromancy.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
He's saying that's not what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm using official astrology.
Right, which was, accepted
by the church.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a way of kind of legitimizing his methods.
Right. He's saying, look, I'm not messing around with demons.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the stars.
I'm a scholar.
Yeah.
I'm using, accepted knowledge.
Yeah. And God's given me this gift of interpretation. So.
Yeah.
And he also mentions a pretty interesting thing. He does.
He talks about, presenting these hidden books to Vulcan.
Right.
And burning them to prevent the misuse of occult knowledge.
Uh-huh.
And especially in the search for transmutation of metals.
Alchemy.
Yeah. So it's like he's saying there are some things that we're not supposed to know.
Right. Some doors that should remain closed.
Yeah.
And, maybe he felt that alchemy was one of those things, that it was too dangerous or that it was, leading people astray from a more spiritual path.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to kind of come back to this whole idea of, astronomical scrutiny and divine inspiration.
So he's kind of circling back now to the core.
Yeah, to the core.
Of his method.
Of what he does.
Yeah.
And he says that insight into the future can be gained through good judgment.
Good judgment.
By connecting place names with planetary configurations and inspiration.
So it's not just enough to look at the stars.
Right.
You have to have this good judgment, ability to interpret.
Yeah.
And to see the connections.
Yeah, and I think the inspiration.
Inspiration is key.
The really key, because that's that divine element.
That's the divine spark.
Yeah. And then he kind of reiterates, he's not claiming to be a prophet.
Right. He says, I make no claim to the title of prophet.
But he's inspired.
Right.
He's saying, I'm just a mortal man.
Right.
But my perception is no further from heaven.
Than the feet are from the earth.
From the earth.
And that's really poetic.
It is. It's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
It is.
And he's acknowledging his human limitation.
His humility.
Yeah.
He's not claiming to be perfect.
Right.
Or infallible.
Yeah, but he's saying that he has this
unique perspective.
Yeah, that God has given him.
Right.
And then he gets into
the timeline.
Yeah, the timeline of the prophecies.
Yeah.
And he says that, he's written these books.
100 astronomical quatrains each. Right. And they span from his time all the way to the year 3797.
Wow.
That's a long time.
A long time.
That's a long way off.
Yeah. And that really speaks to the scale
yeah.
of his ambition and his belief in his visions.
The scope of his vision is incredible.
Yeah, it really is.
You know, to think that far ahead is amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, the year 3797.
Right.
I mean, people are still talking about that today.
They are.
You know, like, what did he mean?
What's going to happen?
What's going to happen then?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he also talks about
he does.
These prophecies being universally understood upon earth.
Upon earth, yeah.
In the fullness of the Republic.
The Republic.
And you know, that's kind of a hopeful vision.
It is hopeful.
Yeah.
You know, he's imagining a future where everybody understands these things, where there's no more persecution.
Right.
No more misunderstanding.
And this idea of the Republic, you know, you can interpret that in many ways.
Right.
But it suggests some kind of, you know, ideal society where knowledge is shared freely.
Yeah.
And everybody benefits from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he kind of gets into
the two principal factors of a prophet's intelligence.
Right. Yeah. He breaks it down.
He breaks it down.
Yeah.
And he says it's supernatural light through astral science and prophesying through inspired revelation.
Right.
Which he says is part of divine eternity.
Yeah. So he's kind of giving us the recipe.
Yeah. The formula.
Yeah, for prophecy.
Yeah.
And
so it's this combination of, you know, intellectual study of the stars, but also this direct connection to a divine source of knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not just one or the other. It's both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
he gets into some of the specifics of his prophecies.
Yeah.
And he talks about this worldwide conflagration that's coming.
Yeah.
That's going to lead to catastrophes and revolutions.
Yeah.
You know, this is part of what makes Nostradamus so compelling and also kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Because he's talking about these huge global events.
Yeah, it's apocalyptic.
It is apocalyptic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also mentions these diminished rains
right.
and fire and fiery missiles falling from the heavens.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen the movies about the apocalypse.
It's a very vivid image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also mentions that signs of events to come
must be manifested to whomever prophesies.
Right, yeah.
So he's saying,
he's seeing these things.
He's seeing these things unfold in some way, whether it's visions or just this deep knowing.
Yeah.
This intuition.
Yeah. And then he talks about this approaching sword of death with pestilence and war, more horrible than there's ever been.
Wow.
Due to 3 men's work.
3 men's work.
And famine.
Yeah.
Confirmed by the stars.
So once again, he's relying on the stars.
Right.
To confirm his predictions.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is interesting because
it's kind of a warning.
It is a warning.
Yeah, he's saying this is coming.
Yeah.
And it's going to be bad.
And God's mercy will only last until the majority of his prophecies are fulfilled.
Oh. So
there's a timeline here.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty
sobering
sobering
to end this preface to his son on that note.
Yeah, but when you really think about this preface, it's clear that he wasn't just making stuff up.
Right.
He had a method.
He did.
To his madness.
Yeah.
He wasn't just, randomly spouting predictions.
Yeah.
He really thought that he was using this combination of, astrology and divine inspiration to see the future.
And he did it in a very particular way.
Right.
To protect himself.
Yeah, and to kind of make sure that the right people got the message.
That's right. Yeah. So, he really was this divinely inspired interpreter of cosmic events.
Yeah, he was trying to make sense of this really chaotic world that he was living in and to give people
guidance
and hope.
Yeah, and I think, for you, the listener, you really have to take all that into account.
You do.
When you're thinking about...
When you're reading the prophecies.
Yeah, how to interpret these prophecies.
Yeah.
Because they're so...
cryptic.
And open to interpretation.
Yeah, and it's easy.